Um, okay, so we'll get started, and hopefully by the time we get to you, Ms. Acton, you will have all your students there. So good morning and welcome on behalf of the Goodwin Holocaust Museum and Education Center. We're located in Cherry Hill, New Jersey, and my name is Helen Kirschbaum. I'm the Education Director for the center. With me this morning is Dr. Jerry Ehrlich. He is a local physician who's going to be speaking to you about his experiences in Darfur. But before I ask him to speak, I'd like the schools to introduce themselves, tell us where you're located, and a little bit about what's going on there. So Egg Harbor Township, why don't you start us off since we know you?
Good morning, Helen, and good morning, Dr. Jerry. It's been a long time since I've seen you. How are you? Egg Harbor Township is located in a beautiful residential area about 15 miles outside of Atlantic City, New Jersey. And we have our Holocaust and Genocide classes, and people will be joining and leaving as our block scheduling permits. But we're really tickled to death to be seeing you guys again.
Thanks. We're happy to see you too, Egg Harbor Township. Cornell High School, are you with us, and can you introduce yourself?
It's on. Hi. We're from Coraopolis, Pennsylvania, and we're really excited to be here. Everyone else say hi.
Thank you. We're happy to have you with us. And Ms. Acton, can you introduce yourself?
Hi, we're from Acton High School. We're right outside of Philadelphia. We're about 20 miles outside of Philadelphia. We have a very active Save Darfur foundation at the school. We've been working with Save Darfur. The organization itself have been nationally recognized, have letters from Condoleezza Rice. We've raised probably about $70,000 for Darfur, have been very committed individuals since 2006. So we are very excited to be a part of this, and we thank you very much.
Thank you. We're happy to have everyone joining us. I'm going to ask Dr. Ehrlich to start his presentation, tell you a little bit about what his personal experiences were, and following that, we will take questions from each site. So, Dr. Ehrlich, would you like to start us off?
Thank you. My name is Jerry Ehrlich. I'm a pediatrician. I've been in private practice in Cherry Hill, New Jersey since 1966. In the spring of 1991, I read an article in the newspaper about Doctors Without Borders, and I felt a mission with Doctors Without Borders had to be a part of my lifetime medical experience. I called their New York office, asked to volunteer, received a very, very brief application of which one of the questions were, are you willing to go into an area of danger and conflict? If you answered no, your application was thrown out. I filled out the application. Several months later, I received a phone call to go to Paris, which is where the organization is headquartered, and several days later, I found myself in Sri Lanka, the little island country off the coast of India. I wound up spending a year in Sri Lanka during their very, very ugly civil war. But what I'm going to share with you this morning is my last mission, the summer of 2004 in Darfur, Sudan. Very briefly, Sudan at that time was the largest country in Africa, roughly 40 million people. The most western part of Sudan was Darfur, land of the Fours, which originally was their own country. Prior to World War I, for security reasons, the British, and at that time Sudan was part of the British Empire, incorporated Darfur into Greater Sudan, and when the British Empire broke up, the Sudanese government of Khartoum kept Darfur. Because of years of discrimination, neglect, abuse, lack of civil rights, the people of Darfur revolted against the Sudanese government, and the Sudanese government responded with what has been called the first genocide of the 21st century. This is the only legal slide you're going to see. Taking pictures in Darfur was prohibited. You had to get special permission from the Sudanese government, and you were monitored by a member of their security force. There are hundreds and hundreds of these banners. This picture was taken in Khartoum, the capital of Sudan. There are hundreds and hundreds of these banners all over Khartoum. Peace and unity. In English, obviously for Western audiences, and the sign of a dove. My comment on this, a joke. Nothing but a cruel joke. This is Darfur, summer of 2003, 4, 5, 6, and as we sit here this morning. This drawing was done by a child 10, 11, 12 years of age. When I went to Darfur, I wanted to bring back images drawn by children depicting what their life was. I brought with me 20 boxes of crayons and 400 pieces of drawing paper, and I gave them out to kids at random, usually when they were being discharged from the medical center. And I told these kids, draw whatever you want to draw. Show me what your life in Darfur is all about. I just want to take back a few drawings back home as a remembrance of my time in Darfur. And I gave out a box of crayons and 20, 30, 40 pieces of drawing paper to kids at random. And I really didn't know what I would get back and how many pictures I would get back. But to my amazement, these kids came back and back and back, and I wound up with 157 pieces of children's art, which I'll share a few with you this morning. It's obvious what this child is drawing. Typical Darfurian village, mud brick thatch, in flames, on fire, airplanes dropping bombs, people dead, people running. This is the life in Darfur that this child wanted me to bring back to the U.S. The Sudanese government has bombed 90% of the villages in Darfur. These are not military targets. There's no tanks here. There's no rocket launchers. There's no heavy artillery. Just indigenous black Africans, Darfurians, living like they've been living for thousands of years. But yet the Sudanese government continues to bomb these villages. This on the top is what is called Janjaweed, Janjaweed. Translated from Arabic to English, it means devil on a camel or devil on a horse. And these are the armed-funded Arab militias that ride through the villages after they've been bombed, throw live children into burning huts, kill all the men, and then throw the bodies down the wells to contaminate the water, steal anything of value, and then gang rape the women. Truly a devil on a camel. This is what is known as a technical pickup truck with a rapid-fire weapon that goes through the villages and shoots everything in sight. Here you see a house on fire, someone in here. Again and again, pictures of violence and horror. A copy of this picture was sent to the International Criminal Court in The Hague and was used as evidence to indict Omar al-Bashir, the president of Sudan, for crimes against humanity and genocide. Because, and I think you'll agree, when you look at this picture, this looks like someone in an army uniform. And this indicates the involvement of the Sudanese army in the genocide. Again, someone with in an army uniform shooting into a hut, a technical shooting someone in the head, perhaps his wife running after him. Again, someone shooting. The young artist, if you can read it down here, his or her signature in Arabic. One of the young artists returning her drawings to me. And every time I look at this picture, there's two things that come into mind. Could she imagine the exposure of her artwork, shown over and over and over again to hundreds of live audiences, up in museums, colleges, libraries, amazing distribution, multiple websites? Could she imagine how much her artwork has been shown? And the other thing I wonder, 9 years later, where is this pretty young girl? Is she still alive, or is she a victim of Omar al-Bashir's genocide? This is the drawing she's giving me. Again, the Janjaweed, the devil on a camel or the devil on a horse, the flag of Sudan, a technical, someone else shooting, airplane. Over and over again, pictures of violence. This is the image. This is what they wanted me to bring back home as what their life in Darfur is. Now I'm going to take you inside Kalma Camp, K-A-L-M-A, and this is one of the 26 displaced people's camps in Darfur. Because their villages have been bombed, destroyed, they've wandered across the desert where humanitarian aid organizations have set up centers to give them help. When I first arrived here in June of 2004, the estimated population was 30,000. Every day that I entered the camp, I could see it getting bigger and bigger and bigger. It was getting closer and closer and closer to our dormitories. When I left 2 months later, the estimated population was 60,000. A recent article in the New York Times stated that there was now approximately 100,000 people living in Kalma Camp. I think you can appreciate the harshness of the desert. Straw huts or canvas huts. Here you see the framework. Anywhere from 2 to 8 people living in these huts. And it goes on and on and on and on and on. Another view of Kalma Camp. Endless straw huts covered with plastic sheeting and given out by humanitarian aid organizations to protect them against the rain. These people were totally dependent on humanitarian aid organizations for food, for water, for shelter, for medical care. This is a latrine here, and there's a huge pit in the ground, and when filled up with urine and feces, it's covered over, and another one is being used. And again, the camp goes on and on and on through the desert. This is the, quote, center of Kalma Camp, and these straw huts are various businesses, so to speak, where they will sell anything you can imagine. Fabric to make clothing, odd and end food, all sorts of things. And here you see men wandering around. There was a school, or there is a school here in Kalma Camp, which was a great big straw hut that had 2 classrooms that held about 125, 150 students. I visited the school twice. The first time, via my translator, I spoke to the student body, trying to tell them how important it was to maintain an education under these horrible circumstances. I went back 2 weeks later, met with the teachers, and tried to give them some support. It was crucial for them to continue the education of these children, even though only 1 out of every 10 children in Kalma camp could go to school because the school was just not big enough. Yes, this is to show you the involvement of our government. If you could read this, it says United States of America and Disaster Relief. And this big sack contains either blankets or mats. They're flown into a local airport about 10 miles away and then trucked to the center. And someone will come in a wheelbarrow and take it to this young mom's hut so that she'll have blankets to sleep on or mats to sleep on rather than having to sleep on the desert floor. We are the biggest donor of humanitarian aid to Darfur, and this is to our credit. But in all honesty, what these people need is security, and that they have not yet received. Yes, now I'll take you inside the medical center where I spent my time. Here you see the Doctors Without Borders flag flying overhead, indicating a safe haven. Here you see the beginning of the medical center. This held roughly 200 children and usually 200 mothers, and we fed them, did everything we could to take care of them. This is the waiting room, which I'll show you in another minute. And here you see moms all lined up, typical African style, babies in little sacks on their back, all waiting to get into the waiting room. And this is the waiting room. And this is the first thing I saw every morning, roughly 8 o'clock when I got in. And the first thing we did, myself and my translator would crawl through all these moms and kids, and I would make what is called an eyeball or a visual diagnosis. I'd pick out 1, 2, 3, 4, perhaps 5 kids that were critical, needed immediate care, could not wait to be seen routinely an hour, 2, 3 hours. We'd take as many as were critical, take them right out of the waiting room into one of the other wards, which we jokingly called the ICU, and begin treatment right away, whether it was IV fluids, antibiotics, whatever they needed. And then we'd go back and try to see as many kids as we could. We had nurses examining the children, and the ones that had to be admitted were admitted to various shelter tents, and others that could go home went home on medication and were told to come back the next day, 2 days, 3 days, whatever felt was necessary. This is one of the 8 wards. As I said, we held roughly 200 children with their mothers, and most of my day was spent crawling through here, trying to examine as many patients as I could. There was no way you could examine 200 patients a day adequately. That was impossible. I was very, very dependent on the nurses who were constantly monitoring patients. And they would direct me who was sick, who had to be seen, ones that were under control that I didn't have to see. I was very, very dependent on the dedication, the motivation, and the hard work of the nurses. They directed me where I had to go. But I think you can appreciate the number of patients, and this is just one of the shelters, and there were 8 of them. Now I'm going to show you a few slides of what we saw over and over and over again. Severe malnutrition. And I think you can appreciate the condition of this child. He's 2.5 years old, and once upon another lifetime, he ran, he jumped, he chattered, he did everything a normal 2.5-year-old does. But now, due to malnutrition, he's so weak, all he can do is lie here. And he's extraordinarily vulnerable. Due to malnutrition, his lungs are very predisposed to pneumonia. His gastrointestinal tract to diarrhea, which could wipe him out quickly. His kidneys can't handle normal amounts of salt and water. And what's most important of all, due to malnutrition, his immune system is shot. For all practical purposes, this is like a patient with AIDS. Only he has not been immunocompromised from the HIV virus, but malnutrition has done the exact same thing to him. I think you can appreciate the sunken eyes, the scapula, the rib cage, loss of pigmentation in the hands, all signs of severe malnutrition. Again, I think you can appreciate the chest, everything seen, sunken abdomen, pelvis, pathetic look on his face. And here you see the desert floor, the mats, and this is what I would do, is crawl from patient to patient, trying to see as many as I could. Again, severe malnutrition, totally denied by the Sudanese government. And they tell you the people of Darfur are well cared for and well fed, and the little blurbs that you're seeing on TV, reading the newspaper, is just Western propaganda to recolonize the Sudan. But here you see it for real over and over again, the severe malnutrition of Darfur. The pathetic look on this child's face, but look at the look on this mom's face. I hope you can see it. This is the look of post-traumatic stress disorder, this expressionless look. And I saw this over and over and over again. I'd hug these mothers. I'd do everything I could to support them, tell them their child is going to get better. But all I got was this expressionless look. And when the conflict in Darfur ends, this is going to require an immense amount of therapists and psychologists to deal with the post-traumatic stress disorder. Again, the look on this mom's face, the look of post-traumatic stress disorder. Her 5-year-old child, barely able to sit up. And again, I think you can appreciate the thinness of the arms and the rib cage. The older sibling, in much better shape. The younger you were, the more vulnerable you were to malnutrition. The more you were affected, and the more you became quickly malnourished. 5 years old and barely able to sit up. Look how thin those arms are and the rib cage. Next. Yeah, this is measles. It's hard to appreciate the rash on the black skin. You might be able to make it out. We had a measles epidemic when I was at Kalma camp. And measles killed 1 out of every 4 children. Again, due to malnutrition and immunocompromising state, they couldn't fight the measles virus. And that's why so many of them died from measles. We had measles vaccine flown in from Europe and we just immunized everyone standing, whether they thought they had the measles vaccine, they weren't sure, they had measles, didn't matter. We just immunized everyone standing, and we truly aborted a catastrophe. We saved an immense amount of lives. Everyone was immunized for measles, and we saw a dramatic drop in the amount of measles and, fortunately, the amount of deaths. Here you see, very typical even to U.S., the arm bracelet with child's name, and this happens to be his or her chart laying here, in which I would write notes, and we'd have different, just like in the U.S., but in a more abbreviated form, temperature, feeding, condition, and so forth, written down. Thanks. Yeah, this is to show you some of the crazy things we did. When this child arrived in the center, she needed an IV, intravenous, because of dehydration and infection. But due to the severity of the infection and the dehydration, she was in a state of what we call vascular collapse. Her veins were collapsed and an IV could not be placed. And what you do under these conditions, you place a needle right through the bone, the big bone in the leg, the tibia, right through it into what is known as the bone marrow, which is a cavity in the bone, which you can visualize as one big non-collapsible vein. Now, I've done this in the U.S. many times. You do it in the ER, you're wearing gloves, the child receives local anesthetic, you have a couple of nurses helping you, you scrub down the area, you have a special needle, and you place it, and then you can run in your fluids and your antibiotics. Here, bare hands, just the mom helping, holding the child, no local anesthetic. Needle was placed right through the tibia into the bone marrow, and fluids and antibiotics were infused for 2 or 3 hours till circulation was restored, and then you can take it out and place a standard IV. Here you see one of the rear fathers, still alive, holding the tubing. The bottle is attached to the top of the shed. I think you can appreciate the almost comatose look on this child's face and the look on the mom's face. I hope this guy knows what he's doing. It was very, very dramatic and emotional several days later when she went home with the child better. Yes, this is a rare condition called kwashiorkor, and it's due to severe protein malnutrition. Very, very, very rarely seen in the U.S., but we saw a fair amount there. And I think you can appreciate the swelling of the feet, swelling of the legs, swelling of the face. And this, as I said, is due to severe protein malnutrition, which produces accumulation of fluid in the feet, legs, and face. And you got to be very, very, very tricky treating this, because if you treat them a little too aggressively, you're just going to move the fluid from the feet, legs, face into the lungs, and you get fluid in the lungs, and then you're really in deep trouble. So it was a very, very tricky illness to treat. Took time, patience, close monitoring, but we did it most of the time. Again, extraordinarily rare in the U.S., kwashiorkor. This is something I'm extraordinarily proud, happy to be a part of. I don't even know what the correct words are. The training of 2 local doctors. Dr. Majid here is examining the patient. Dr. Najil is watching. I took the picture. When it's all over, we'll step back. Dr. Najil may examine the patient, I may examine the patient, and then we'll discuss, arrive at a diagnosis and treatment plan. And this is how medicine has been taught for thousands of years, going back to the temples of ancient Greece. And this, as I said, was so important, so emotional for me. My last night in Darfur, they took me into town to a little local photographer studio and they wanted multiple pictures of me taken with them. They wanted to remember me as part of their medical education. And I was so proud, and it was so meaningful. And again, I wonder, 9 years later, where are these two young doctors? Are they still caring for patients in Darfur, or are they also victims? Miriam. One day, wandering through Kalma camp, taking my illegal pictures, I passed a hut, and it smelled like coffee coming out. I stuck my head in, and there was Miriam, who ran a coffee shop. I think you can see all her equipment back here. And it became a ritual. Every afternoon, after I took my pictures, I would drop into Miriam's, sit on a stool, have a cup of coffee, chatter whoever was there, and then give Miriam a hug and say, Bukra, I'll see you tomorrow. But again, look at the look on Miriam's face. The look of post-traumatic stress disorder. And again, I wonder, 9 years later, is Miriam still running this coffee tea shop in Kalma camp? I don't know. Next one. Mary and Abdullah. Two nurses I could have never survived without. Two motivated, dedicated, hardworking, knowledgeable nurses. When I was in one ward, they were monitoring children in the other wards. They directed me where to go, who had to be seen, which children were turning bad. So very, very dependent on their expertise, knowledge, dedication, and hard work. Look at the smile on Mary's face. Abdullah, a little more stoic. And at this point, I have to acknowledge the person that took this picture, my translator, who knew what I was doing. He knew about the illegal pictures I was taking. He knew about the children's artwork I smuggled out of Darfur. And he truly put his life in danger. Because if the Sudanese government knew what he knew, he would have been gone in the blink of an eye. Truly someone who put his life in danger so that word could come out. And now I think the last slide. People say, Jerry, what the heck is it all about? You go to this God-forsaken country, this first genocide of the 21st century. What in the world have you done? Look at this mom, this beautiful young Darfurian mom, and ask her. Look at that smile on her face. When she arrived in the center, this is all she had left. The rest of her family was assassinated. He was quite ill. We got him better, and she's going home with him. And this is what I want you to remember. Maybe someday you'll grow up to be a fine young citizen of Darfur, and she'll tell him, listen, once upon a time you were very, very sick, and this funny old white doctor came from this far-off place, the United States, and he helped us, and he helped the people of Darfur. As it states in the Old Testament, who saves a life saves the world. And maybe this is what it's all about. This one young child and this mom. And now, 9 years later, the people of Darfur are still waiting as the world which once said, never again, is allowing it to happen again and again. And now I guess I'll be open for question and answers.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ehrlich. Why don't you join me up here at the table?
Sure, thank you. No, thank you for...
And we would like to invite the schools to forward any questions. Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Egg Harbor Township, we'd like to start with you. Do your students have any questions for Dr. Ehrlich?
My students always have questions.
Do I get up?
But we're not sure what that was. Well, first of all, let me just say that I've seen this presentation 5, 6, 7 times, and I think that it's not only the same effect each time, it's just the fact that things haven't been ameliorated, that we're still talking about the same thing, weighs really heavily on my mind. Every time we do this, it's another year, and we're still talking about the same thing. But I before my student asks a question, and I know Dr. Ehrlich is a very humble man. We would like to thank you for, what you did by going over there and caring and administering medical care. But I don't know that anyone really realizes how instrumental you are in bringing this concern to our students. So I would like to thank you. And Allie has a question.
What methods did you use to train the doctors in Darfur without the technology we have here when we train doctors?
Yeah,
Okay, so they're asking, how did you train the doctors in Darfur without the technology that you have available to you in the United States?
Well, we were very, very practical. As you saw on the slide, we would examine the patient, usually one of the doctors or both of the doctors, and then we arrived at a diagnosis. We had IV fluids, we had antibiotics, we had an awful lot of drugs that were basically flown in from either the U.S. Or Europe and transported, and we could do a lot. We could do a lot without X-rays and ultrasonography and MRIs and things that, we take for granted in this country. We really could do a lot. There were some patients that needed more than that, and then we would transport them to a local hospital about 10 or 15 miles away they didn't have MRIs there, but they had X-rays and ultrasound and certainly more equipment than we did. If the child had to be intubated, receive oxygen, we had just temporary stuff like that we could treat them with till we transported them to the hospital. But you would be surprised, just with appropriate antibiotics and other medications and needles and bottles and tubings, you could do an awful lot. Many of these kids just had to be slowly fed in a very, very scientific way, which we were knowledgeable in. We had special feeding formulas that we made up in one of our tent kitchens, and I won't get into it because it's very, very, even for where we are, it's very sophisticated compared to U.S. standards. in which we had special formulas that we fed these kids very low calorie so that their gastrointestinal tract could get used to food which they hadn't had for weeks and weeks and weeks. And we would slowly work them up over a period of a month where they could tolerate a real diet. So we could really do a lot without MRIs and ultrasound and x-rays and all the things we take for granted in the U.S.
Thank you. And I apologize. I was supposed to tell you at the very beginning of this program that Magpie is recording and archiving today's program. So, Jennifer, I got it in there. Ms. Acton, are you there? Would you like to ask a question for Dr. Ehrlich?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, sorry. Okay, so our club, we always try to raise Darfur awareness. Okay, we try to raise Darfur awareness. So I'm wondering, since after 2008, since Sudan's basically closed off and Darfur, nobody can really see anything, what do you think us as an organization should do other than just try to get out information to the school?
Okay, so we had a little difficulty hearing you. Let me see if I got your question. You're saying that you have a club and knowing that Darfur is closed off, you're asking what is it that you can do to help? Is that your question, or would you like to repeat it?
Yeah, that's basically just it.
Yeah. All humanitarian aid organizations were thrown out of Darfur several years ago when Omar al-Bashir, the dictator of Sudan, was indicted by the criminal court in The Hague. We were all thrown out: Doctors Without Borders, Save the Children, Oxfam, multiple humanitarian aid organizations, because we were accused of being spies. How can you get involved? You can still donate to these humanitarian aid organizations, which are still trying to do their best for Darfur, and just political involvement, whether it's writing your congressman, writing your senator, writing the White House, anything to show that you know what's going on and you're concerned, and that honestly we could end this thing just politically without any military involvement. But it's not happening, and it's just sliding into no place land.
Thank you. Cornell, we'd like to have your first question.
Yes, we watched the film and Brian was afraid of response from the government. Are you afraid that your pictures could still get you in trouble?
They got me into trouble many years ago. When I first gave this presentation at a high school in central New Jersey, the Sudanese ambassador to the UN was in the audience. I didn't know it, but it didn't matter. I gave the same presentation that you saw this morning. Evidently, he had either a child or a relative that was a member of that high school, a student in that high school, and he was told that I was speaking, and he asked the principal if he could come, and of course, principal said yes. And he left, of course, at the end of the presentation. And shortly afterwards, I received multiple letters and telephone calls from Sudanese ambassador to UN, even Doctors Without Borders, multiple organizations, and phone calls to stop my presentations about Darfur. I read them and I just filed them away, and I kept on going hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times, and I received multiple letters and multiple phone calls to stop. But I just disregarded all of them. I felt like the original founder of Doctors Without Borders, Dr. Bernard Kouchner, we must speak for those who cannot speak for themselves. So I keep talking about Darfur. But I did receive multiple, from unimaginable sources, letters and phone calls to stop my speaking. But I've disregarded it.
Thank you. Egg Harbor Township, we're back to you.
Hang on one second. Go ahead.
Did you go anywhere besides the camp and the hospital in Darfur?
Did you go anywhere in Darfur beyond the camp or the hospital?
Really, no. I had a, when I arrived, I had a day or so in Khartoum where I showed you those pictures. And at the end, I had maybe half a day in Khartoum. But no, really, it was strictly the dormitory we slept in, the refugee camp center, and I would go to the hospital here and there to follow up patients. And that was it.
Would it have been safe for you to go anywhere else?
Well, who knows? But, I always tell the story that one day I just wandered, I had a half hour, an hour off, and I just wandered through this marketplace, which was very, to me, exotic. And wandered around and looked at everything being sold, and there must have been thousands and thousands of people there. And then they needed me at the refugee center, so they sent out a messenger, and all of a sudden in the middle I hear someone yelling, Dr. Jerry, we need you back. And there was someone waving to me, and I went over and I said, Yassine, I said, how did you find me and all these thousands and thousands of people? And he laughed and he said, look around. It wasn't hard. I was the only white face in this whole crowd. And let's face it, when I got back, I said, someone could have clunked me over the head with a barrel or something like that and dragged me into one of these huts, taken whatever I had in my pockets, and no one would know the difference. So there is no doubt an element of danger when you're in these impoverished countries and you sort of stand out, but you just get used to it and you trust people, and nothing happened. We've had bad things happen. When I was in Darfur, we had 4 volunteers who were assassinated in Afghanistan. They were just going from one medical center to the next, and they were just stopped in their vehicle on the road and just assassinated and robbed. So bad things can happen. But, that's sort of what, you have to think about and expect when you go. And when you're briefed, and as I said in the application, they ask, are you willing to go into an area of danger and conflict? And when you get your briefing before you go out, you're being told that you're going into a dangerous area where anything can happen. But that's part of your mission.
Thank you. Ms. Acton, it's your turn.
Hi. I just wanted to know that in the near future, has there been any improvement in Darfur since 2008? Do you see any hope for the near future?
And from everything that I've been read and been told about, no. There has been really no improvement. That the situation is still very, very bad, and it may even be worse. It's without, as I said, these humanitarian aid organizations there, the people of Darfur are totally dependent on the Sudanese government, and how much of this humanitarian aid reaches them, no one quite really knows. So in a way, it may even be worse.
Thank you. Cornell High School, we're back to you.
Yes, we wanted to know how long were you there, and did you see any Janjaweed attacks while you were at the camps?
Yeah, I was there for 2 months. I didn't see any Janjaweed attacks, but during my travels, I'd see them hanging out right opposite the camp, these shady-looking guys with all sorts of guns on camels or on horses, and everyone, of course, was scared to go. Women especially were really never went outside the camp because they'd be gang raped. That was notoriously known. And when we left at night, there was stories that they would come in and do all sorts of ugly things. But I personally never saw it. I did see bombed villages. In my travels to and from Kalma camp, I saw villages that were totally, nothing was there. Just burnt out huts, shacks, totally destroyed.
Thank you. Egg Harbor Township, we're back to you.
Hi. I was wondering, when you were treating the children in the camps and the hospitals, have you ever, have you gone without a day, I can't do this anymore, or did you just, wanted to break down crying or something like that?
Okay, so they're asking, when you were treating the children in the hospital, in the village, did you feel frustrated? Did you feel like I can't do this anymore? Did you break down and get emotional? How did you react to what you were seeing?
Well, that's very, I don't know if emotional is the correct word, but sitting here, I can vividly recall many events, and one I'll just share with you briefly. It was a child that had measles, and because of her underlying condition, she developed what's called measles encephalitis. That means the measles virus affected the brain, and she went into severe seizures, and all I could do was hold her in my arms, try to keep her mouth open, breathe for her, get a vehicle, and head off to the hospital. But she died in my arms on the way to the hospital. And there was nothing, I could do. It was very, very, very emotional. How did it affect me? You get depressed, you get angry that, this could have been prevented. It's difficult. You have difficult mental events that occurred over and over again. Things, as I said, that make you angry, depressed, a lot of other things. But you just realize you got to overcome it, take a couple of deep breaths, give yourself a head job, and just go back to work.
And also go about what you're doing now and speaking out so that the world knows what happened.
Right. You're right. I'm glad you brought it up, Helen. In a way, this is therapy for me to talk about this.
Thank you. Good question. Ms. Acton, we're back to you.
We don't have any questions right now, but thank you so much. This was very informative.
Thank you for being a part of this audience.
Okay, Cordell, we're going to give you your last question then.
We actually don't have any more questions, but thank you for answering all of ours.
Thank you again.
Well, thank you for joining us. We hope you learned a lot from the movie as well as today's presentation. Egg Harbor Township, do you have any last comments or questions?
Yes, absolutely. While we were here, our homeroom announcements came on, and it's pretty funny. Well, it's not funny that Jerry was presenting his experiences, and it took us to a different world because our announcements were about Valentine's Day and in our poll, which Super Bowl commercial came in first, and which one was it? Oh, the Doritos was the #1 here. And, I'm looking at my students and I'm looking at the students from the other schools and can't help but be proud of these guys because they're listening to what you have to say. They're becoming informed.